Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to a brand new series of Our Plant Stories. Plants do tell stories. They tell us stories about the people who grew them, the places we find them, and the reasons we love them. Our Plant Stories is a podcast where those stories are shared. Penn Allen contacted me last year after hearing the first series of the podcast. And so it was I found myself on a rock, literally a rock, that was once a garden in the Lake District, open in 1919 to the public, but no more. It was the early morning as Penn and I scrambled up the rock, searching for paths and steps now overgrown, taking us to the foot of Loughrig Fell.
We're above the rooftop of White Crags, and as we look out, we've got Windermere stretching away, slightly buried in the rising mist. The treetops, you can just see Old Brathy and Brathy Hall through the treetops. Ambleside, we can't see now because the trees are so overgrown, but just off down to our left. And I mean, you just feel as though you're on top of the world.
5 years ago, on a wet October afternoon, Penn Allen sat down and began to read her great-grandmother's diaries. It has led her on an extraordinary journey, resulting in a book called The Lost Garden of Loughrig. I'll put all the details on the website, ourplantstories.com. But even before the diaries and letters and the book, there was a plant memory. So welcome to Penn's Viburnum. Penn, you emailed me, which was lovely because you'd heard the podcast and you had a plant story, and that was unbelievably exciting to me. And you said it was about a viburnum, and I wanted to know, why is there a viburnum that is important to you, that you knew about as a child?
One of my very earliest memories, I should think I was probably 7 or 8, was on a frosty winter's day with my mum, who was a great gardener, picking flowers to put inside, and stopping beside a huge bush that was in full flower in a winter garden that was sort of nude of everything else, and being overwhelmed by the smell of it, the scent of it, and saying to my mum as she was snipping away with her scissors, "What's that lovely smell?" And she said, "Oh, that's a viburnum, that's a viburnum fragrans." And then alongside that, I've always had a sort of misty understanding that my family's history was in some way connected with plant hunters, and that my great-grandfather had sponsored an expedition. But it was all very misty and very cloudy, and it wasn't until sort of probably almost 60 years later that events started to unfold, and the importance of the viburnum in the story began to show itself and sort of helped me really, I suppose, connect the dots and find out what was important in the story to me as well.
So we're standing in a garden. We're a stone's throw from Lake Windermere, perhaps a little bit more than a stone's throw. We've come off the road, you drive up a long drive, you come to a beautiful white house, arts and craft house, which is literally sitting at the bottom of Loughrig Fell. Tell me how your family is connected to this house.
Well, my great-grandmother Alice Hough, as she was married, Redmayne as she was born and raised at Braithy Hall, which is, again, a stone's throw from here. She married and moved off with her husband to Derby to raise a family, but never lost her love for the place that she'd been raised in. And when the opportunity came for them in 1903, they moved back to Ambleside. They found a plot of land. They managed to commission arts and crafts architect Dan Gibson, and between them they built this exquisite, simply exquisite house halfway up a craggy fell with a just stupendous view over Windermere and also overlooking Alice's former home. You look from the garden across to Braithy Hall where she was raised. So a very special place for both of them, I think.
And when they have finished building it, who moves in? Who's living here?
Alice and Harry move in, and they move in September of 1904 with their 3 daughters. Harry's a well-reputed surgeon, and he travels all over the country performing operations and things, but he also has a surgery that he runs from Ambleside, and he does consultations from his library in the house. And you're sort of talking early 1900s in Ambleside with all the local social scene, the movers and the shakers, the Canon Rawnsley, Beatrix Potter, the Armitt sisters, a hugely influential group of poets and social reformers, and they were just absolutely in the heart of that. One day it was tea somewhere, another day it would be a tennis tournament at Rydal Hall, and another day it would be a ball in the assembly rooms in Ambleside. They had a golden life. It was that era, I suppose.
And Alice was a gardener?
Yes. Alice, you need to remember that, you're on a sort of wild, craggy fellside, volcanic rock, the size of, let your imagination run wild and you still not got there. And you can only really imagine the feat of beginning to clear this by hand.
So she's a mother, she has 3 daughters?
3 daughters, yeah. The eldest, Maud, the middle one, my grandmother, Marjorie, and then the youngest, Dorothy, who sort of carried the gardening gene, I think.
But then, and when I read your book, there was an audible gasp from me when this happened. Tragedy hits, doesn't it?
Yes, they'd only been in the house for about 5 years, living their sort of golden life of regattas on Windermere and, very settled, very happy, quietly developing the garden. And Alice falls ill, and within several days she dies of a combination of pneumonia and meningitis, and pulls the rug really from everybody's feet. The story for me was recorded in the diaries that Alice kept so meticulously for, I think I've got about 25 years worth of them. And she maintains the diaries until she becomes ill. And then there's about 2 or 3 days blank. And then in his hand, he takes over her writing her diary. And in his hand, he writes, at 6:30, she passed peacefully to her rest. And he continues then for the next probably 5 or so years to maintain her diary, not quite as meticulously as she had, but he continues to record then the development of the garden from there.
So this is where we, I suppose, move to the rock, because Alice has died. The family are obviously grieving. They then somehow turn their energies to the rock itself, which they haven't really worked on before in such a way. They clear it, they start to plant on it, and we'll put some pictures because you need to see the rock. You can't actually see the rock anymore. Let's be honest. We're looking at the rock, but
it's
actually,
a little bit overgrown.
It's a little bit overgrown, and they start to plant. But there's another person who comes into the story at this point, isn't there? Because they get help from Will Purdom. Tell me about Will. How does he become part of the story?
Yes, well, that I suppose is where the story goes from being a personal family history to a story that has national interest, really. So Alice had been born and raised at Braithy Hall, which is just across the road, and her family's gardener was William Purdom Senior. So Will Purdom, plant hunter as we know him, was born. He wasn't actually born at Braithy Lodge, but they moved here when he was a very, very small. And he worked alongside his father at Braithy Hall until he was 18. Then he disappeared off to Kew, and in the middle of all that excitement, Alice died. Harry, who was just completely heartbroken, I mean, he had lost the love of his life. The passion, the heartbreak in the diaries is hard to describe without reading them. But he sets himself to clear the rock as a monument to the wife that he's loved and lost. And in 1912, Alice had died in 1909. In 1912, Will comes back from his first solo expedition, and he comes back and he's in quite a bad way. He had been sent off to China, sponsored by Veitch and the Arnold Arboretum, and he was sort of following slightly in the footsteps of Ernest Wilson, who'd previously gone to the same part of China. And Ernest Wilson had been sent out with lots of money and lots of backing, and he'd come back with huge plant finds, and he was greatly feted. He was a sort of national hero. Will had been sent out with not really the resources or the finances, and he'd had a very tough time, unknown and on his own, and had come back. I mean, he did bring plants back, but not in the same quantities, and it was all a bit, he was injured whilst he was away, he'd broken his leg whilst he was away, and he came back in 1912, and he was a bit of a downcast fellow, and he came back to Ambleside just at the point as Harry was starting to develop the rock. And the two of them, Harry with his broken heart, trying to create something that he wanted to sort of mark the passing of his beloved wife, and Will, battered and broken from not having had a fantastic time and, you know, feeling very lost, I think, and physically in quite a bad way, set to with Harry in the garden here at White Crags. And my grandfather writes of sort of, you know, filthy day, building steps with Will in the garden. He notes various plants that Will has put in for him. You know, I think he gave Will a free hand, and was just constantly inspired by him.
And does Will discover the viburnum on his first trip to China? Do we know?
Well, there you are, you see. So now she's got to the nub of it. Yes, he does, and it is recorded that he found it on his first solo trip, but because apparently he found it in private grounds, I think it was in a monastery garden, he was not able to attribute it to his expedition. But I believe, and I think the evidence supports, that he brought seeds back to White Crags and that they got them going together. There is evidence in the diary that this viburnum was given to Harry before Will went on his second expedition. So it was never attributed to Will. And then when subsequently, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but he subsequently went back to China with Reginald Farrer on their joint expedition, and found the Viburnum again together, and it was brought back with them jointly, and it is classified as Viburnum farreri, to my eternal chagrin.
Penn's great-grandfather Harry introduced Will to Reginald Farrer, another plant hunter who was an expert in alpines. Farrer, born at Ingleborough Hall in Yorkshire, and Purdom, the son of a gardener in Ambleside, were from very different social classes, and you can hear more about their expedition in a forthcoming offshoot episode. What Penn has are letters, sent from Will in China to Harry at White Crags. Along with 3 other Lakeland gardeners, Harry had helped to sponsor the trip. At that time, no one questioned the ethics of gathering plants from other countries. Plant hunters were admired as adventurers. Now, understandably, there are protocols with strict regulations about what can be collected and for what purpose, ensuring the activity is not resonant of any exploitation or imperialism.
Kew at that time were just developing a rock garden at Wisley. They put some money in. My great-grandfather got a group of local Lakeland gardeners together, and they each put in £25, which to their to their shock they were asked to repeat for a second year. And then after Will leaves, he begins to correspond regularly with my great-grandfather. The letters describe how difficult Will found Farrer, which has never been recorded anywhere else. You know, it's sort of shining a bit of light onto how Will felt about that relationship. He talks quite a lot. He mentions, found a super hellebore. We'll be going back to get seeds from that. He talks quite a lot about that sort of thing. He talks about how much he misses the rock. He always finishes virtually each letter, I think, send my regards to the rock, has the Mechanopsis flowered. The closeness, you can feel the closeness, you can feel the just feel the bond that they had.
I was going to say, it shows real trust that he had in your great-grandfather, doesn't it? That he reveals that much, that he talks about the problems and the difficulties in that way.
Very much so, and he does, in 1 or 2 of the letters he says, of course, this is just between you and I, you won't, but the man is insufferable, but don't tell anybody else.
I love the image in your book of the 3 girls really excited when those letters arrive and they contain seeds.
My grandmother, who was the middle one of the 3 daughters, left a sort of oral archive, if you like, and she describes them sorting the seeds on the dining room table and dividing them up to share between the various sponsors.
We used to get packets of seeds from Will, who we were all very fond of. He was really a friend. And we all sat round the dining room table and hardly dare breathe in case we blew the seeds away, and divided them up into equal quantities. And Will Purdom, who knew the garden so well, used to write little notes to my father and say that so-and-so, mentioning the special plant, would be a good place to put it, and tell him where it'd grow well, because he knew the garden so well.
So, Penn, we've climbed up the garden, literally, scrambled through quite a lot of trees and bushes, but we've come to what you call the shrine. Describe to me what we are looking at, because it's rather special, isn't it?
Yes, it is rather special. The shrine was just a bit of the garden it's got huge volcanic rock crags, and a little corner was created that was known as the shrine, and on it there's an awful lot that isn't here that used to be here. It's a lot of it's sort of broken and fallen down, very derelict, very sad. But still standing is a stone, rough-hewn, carved with the initials of, a handful of people who were very important to the place and to the garden. Right at the top is Alice Maud Hough, my great-grandmother, followed by Charles Henry Hough, my great-grandfather, and the dates of their deaths. And then there are other family members. Nanny features. And then second from the bottom is Will P. So his place, it's just inscribed WP 1921. And I think just confirms, lest there was any doubt, his important place amongst the family, amongst the garden, in the place, in the lakes. He's marked with the family.
And he dies in China.
He never comes back following his second expedition. He never actually comes back to England. He was intending to come home, and then was recontracted, I think, by the Chinese government. And he died in China after a short illness. And not long after Harry received news that Will had died in China, a packet of seeds arrived at White Crags from Will, Prunus humilis, I think, along with a little handwritten note from Will describing the charm of the plant and how to grow it in the garden. Can only imagine, really, the poignancy of that. I don't know where it is, the prunus, but, I'm sure it will have been propagated and it will be in the garden somewhere. But no, they were clearly profound friends, and it's lovely that a sort of firm record has been left, and that we've been all able to tie all the bits together. I think that's the thing.
I think you can sense Penn's fascination with Will Purdom, whose work is less documented than many of the other, more famous Victorian plant hunters. Their introduction of thousands of plants to Britain represent a legacy of empire that should be talked about more. When Penn and I were making this episode, it was clear she was still seeking to understand what drove Will Purdom, often to quite dangerous places, in pursuit of a plant. By chance, I had recently visited Lullingstone Castle and met Tom Hart Dyke, who in his 20s spent 9 months as a hostage, captured while trying to cross the Darien Gap in Cumbria, seeking out orchids. Tom's wild garden at Lullingstone Castle was sketched in his notebook when he thought he was going to die at the hands of his captors. So I brought Penn and Tom together and asked Penn what she would like to ask him.
Well, I suppose I'd like to ask him what on earth makes you want to cross the world to seek out something that you might never find. Are you motivated by the plants? Are you motivated by the adventure? What on earth set you off?
For me, it's a combination of what you have said. For me, number one, it's the plants. The thought of discovering a new species of plant or a new variety or cultivar, or seeing in the wild a natural hybrid that no one has ever seen before, to introduce, as ornamental as possible, this particular plant, to introduce to the Western world is a real buzz for me. But it is that adventurous side to it. You never quite know when you're getting on a plane, or in other cases, ships and so on, or on foot, or with your donkey, or with your horse. You never quite know what's going to happen. But it's that thing of seeing plants in the wild to also improve your husbandry back home. What conditions are these plants growing in? The soil, the altitude, how cold is it? What's the UV light like? Can you improve your husbandry back home by seeing plants in the wild? And you invariably can.
It's absolutely fascinating to me that, that anybody could just sort of think and feel the way that you do. Have you stopped adventuring now, or do you still head off? And if you do, how is it different from because I know in Will's day, first of all, they were they were sponsored, or he especially was sponsored for both his expeditions to China, and sort of equipment and travel and all these sort of things. I mean, it must be vastly different now. What would you have to go through if you wanted to set off and head to China?
If you could get permission to collect from China and back here in the UK, so the hosts and the country you're bringing back the plants to, I should say seed only, I should stress, and no plants, no soil, no herbarium specimens in my case. I'm just an amateur enthusiast who loves to plant hunt. So it is seed only. You have to record everything that you want to collect before you've even left terra firma in the UK. So to answer your question fully, with the World Garden that we've been developing here at Lullingstone over the years, most plants now are donated to us through Wakehurst Place, through Kew Gardens at the Millennium Seed Bank in West Sussex. And they donate lots of expeditions that they've officially arranged and organised abroad to bring back plants, usually in seed form. And they've got excess surplus of things that they've germinated, and we get donated those. And we get donated nearly 90% of our 7,000 different types of plants we've got here are donated. So I actually haven't got to go abroad to collect because it's all coming to me. So I haven't actually got to do that. So I tend to now go abroad and just take pictures, observe things in the wild to improve my knowledge of growing these plants back home. And actually, indeed, for talks and things, yes, I go abroad to give talks and to come back and so on. But actually collecting now, I haven't done for many years.
Yeah, the other thing that I think sort of fascinates me about the character of a plant hunter, if you like, is that you've got to have such vim and such a sense of adventure, but you've also got to have a slightly sort of scientific mind that will, the classifying. I mean, in Will's day, the logging and everything had to be documented and numbered and parcelled and sent back, and to sort of imagine that in the middle of nowhere sometimes. I mean, I understand that he climbed as high as sometimes 10,000 feet without any real equipment or anything like that. The sort of precision that you must have to have. It just strikes me that you must be a very particular calibre of person to have those two sides in your nature.
The tunnel vision that you've got to have to go on a plant hunting trip. You are blinkered, and William would have been the same. You have to be. You've got to be fairly selfish. A lot of plant hunters travelled on their own, and I'm very similar to that. I often am quite selfish. I don't want to feel like I'm holding somebody up or they're holding me up. I want to go there on my own, use the local knowledge if applicable, and go and find this plant and get the results. And the adventure that goes along with it is a byproduct of it. And William would have he was born with it, I suspect. One of his genes, tunnel vision genes, into the world of plants, inspired by his dad. He was a head gardener as well, wasn't he? And
he was, yeah.
Have you got any of Will Purdom's plants in the World Garden, Tom, at the moment?
It's embarrassed to say that the Viburnum I haven't and the poplar I've lost. So what I've got to do is go and get some things from William's collections. The only reason why I'm justifying it here, I haven't, is the space. We are completely a full hotel of plants here. So what I'm going to have to do is in the Arboretum shrub area, I want to try that poplar again. It's a lovely thing, the poplar, and I want to try and get a plant by him that, with his name or not in it, something he introduced in the Arboretum area. That Viburnum sounds absolutely tantalising, especially with the story that you have associated with it, Penn. Sounds great.
Oh, well, if we've done nothing else between us, if you plant another one of those and tell a few people where he found it and what he did, then I shall be a very happy bunny.
In China, there is a Purdom Memorial Forest Park and Museum. And if that sounds intriguing, listen out for a Viburnum offshoot episode coming soon. It's also the story of how another Lakeland gardener, intrigued at the Purdom name on a garden bench, began a quest to find out more, which led her, eventually, to China. These podcasts always end with us learning how to grow the plant in the story. When Penn and I were in the Lake District recording this episode, we went to Holehird Gardens. These gardens are maintained by volunteers now, but back in Harry's time, the owners were in the Funders Syndicate, so receiving seeds from Will Purdom. They have a Viburnum fragrance, and Alan Oatway, garden coordinator at Holehird, knows how to take care of it. Would it be easy to buy one, first of all?
It's not widely available. There are two forms available, the standard form in pink flowers and a form called Candissimum, which is white, which is slightly dwarfer, but they are available if one searches around, and good old Google will help with that. And then in terms of how to grow, I think there are two things that I'd suggest to start with. One is get your money's worth out of the nurseryman that supplies it to you and ask their advice. And second is to consider where it grew naturally. And northern China, which is the source of Viburnum fragrans, in this case, is well known for its cool winters and also for its moist summers. So the mountain climate in China, yes, summer days when the sun is out will be quite warm, so the plant can survive the warmth, but invariably will have moisture at its roots for most of the time. So in the absence of any other knowledge, those are the two things I'd start with.
So when does it flower?
I think further south it would flower much earlier than it does here, but we're looking at January, February as the time that we would have the lovely perfumed flowers as something to look at in the winter garden.
Could you put it in a pot?
I personally wouldn't. I think I've admitted before I'm a particular sort of gardener, and pots need a lot of maintenance in terms of watering. And having said this grows in an area in China where the moisture is pretty much assured. I would hesitate to pot bound it.
What enables someone to have their name added to a plant name?
Connections with the botanist who publishes the original description. The botanist has a lot of power at that time. The description has a very precise requirement on how it's set out, in that you have the herbarium specimen to refer to, you have a Latin description which the taxonomist will write, and then an English translation. And if it's not been named before, the taxonomist really might take advice from peers, but can provide the name. Those names don't always last. Later studies might show that plant was actually the same as one that was previously named, and then the previous name takes precedence. Otherwise, such as with Reginald Farrer, he clearly made a lot of the fact that it was his expedition and he was in charge of it, and so the botanists would defer and put Farrer's name on the plants that they were describing.
And it's always a Latin ending to that, a Farrii or Purdomii?
A Latinised name, yes, and the tendency has moved away from putting people's names on anyway, but referring to the area that the plants come from is the modern style. But yes, the common language of botany is to use Latin because there are no common names for plants that are newly discovered.
So even those names give us an inkling to when in history they were collected, because the fact that people attach the names of the plant hunters, Latinised, but to the plants, is part of that story in a way.
It is indeed. So you'll see many Wilsoniis and Wardii for Kingdon Ward and Forestii for George Forest. But if you look at the later discoveries, and amazingly in this world discoveries are still being made every year, then there will be, I think we walked past Geranium shensiense on the way up to the bed here, and Geranium shensiense is named for Shensi, the province of China where Purdom was collecting.
In 1929, Penn's great-grandfather wrote a book called A Westmoreland Rock Garden, and Penn had a copy of it in her coat pocket.
He says at the end, or sort of towards the end of the book, he says, "And now we must take our leave. Although we may never, to our knowledge, have met each other in the flesh, I feel sure," sorry, I'm getting emotional, "I feel sure that in the spirit, as garden lovers, we shall have wandered together through this little paradise with mutual pleasure." And I just feel when I read that hand, there's something about gardens that can stretch a hand like that, across, down, you know, they just have an ability, don't they, to create these sort of links between people. I mean, you know, I never met him, but I feel as though I did. And it's so sad that the garden is going to rack and ruin. It's so sad that the house is going to rack and ruin. But between his little book and my book, hopefully, they won't ever be completely forgotten. It will probably be retaken by bracken and, you know, but hopefully it won't be forgotten. And really was my motivation, I think, just to make sure that the story lived on.
I hope you have enjoyed this first plant story of this new season. You can find more information on the website ourplantstories.com. As a former BBC radio producer, I have always loved stories, and in this podcast I get to combine that with a love of plants. In Season 1 you can hear about lost and found peonies and fig tree cuttings hidden in the hems of skirts. I love that these plants can take us on journeys, and if you have a story you'd like me to follow, then do email me, sally@ourplantstories.com. If you would like to support this independent podcast, you can buy me a coffee on the website or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Either or both will be very welcome. You can follow me on Instagram, ourplantstories_podcast, or the Our Plant Stories Facebook page, or sign up for the blog via the website, which will give you all the behind-the-scene news on making the podcast and upcoming episodes. Our Plant Stories is produced and presented by me, Sally Flatman. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.